A storyline on Sir John A. Macdonald, Canada's first Prime Minister, from Confederation in 1867 to completion of the railroad in 1885, in his time and his legacy. Chapter 2, our first Prime Minister.
Now, I'd like to introduce Ian, who's going to pick up on Chapter 2. Sir John A. Macdonald was born in 1815 in Glasgow, and his parents moved to Canada when he was 5 years old. Is that picking up?
How's that?
Okay. He was 5 years old only when he came to Canada. And by the time he was 15, he was already working in lawyers' offices. So he had a very young start for that. But I wanted to mention the year 1815 as being an incredibly important year because the British had defeated Napoleon at Waterloo, and that was an incredible boost to the British Empire. After that, England did rule the waves for probably a century. And what was also interesting is the flag of Britain, the ensign, flew over 1/4 of the Earth's land masses. It was the largest empire ever seen. And that was a time, though, of imperialism, colonialism, and rampant racism. And I wanted to quote, it said, the 19th century was the century of these things. The conquering of non-white races was seen as the white race's selfless moral duty. Quote, the white race was morally obligated to civilize the non-white peoples of the planet Earth and and the British Empire was the Englishman's divine burden to reign over God's empire on Earth.
Careful, careful, that champagne cost a fortune.
Mr. Macdonald, do you plan to bribe the entire delegation?
Our methods may differ, Mr. Brown, but our objective is the same.
My objective, sir, is honest talk.
And mine is to win.
Gentlemen, enough. We must convince the Maritimes or there will be no confederation.
Aye, George. Today, civil war grips America. How long before they look to our borders again?
Separated, the colonies are isolated and weak.
But united. Just imagine. To the east, the Atlantic provinces, then Upper and Lower Canada, across the prairies to the Rockies and beyond. A new country made one by a railway from sea to sea. Gentlemen, the time for union is now. I ask you to take the dare.
The Charlottetown Conference set Confederation in motion. On July 1st, 1867, Sir John A. Macdonald became Canada's first Prime Minister.
So, as I say, the non-whites were seen as inferior people and incapable of self-rule, which was incredible. And I made reference to Rudyard Kipling in 1899, 8 years after Sir John died. He published The White Man's Burden, and it personifies how superior the white race was to people at that time. He was elected in 1867, as we've mentioned here, and he oversaw the unification of the provinces. We've had that. He was right when he said that Canada was passing through an exceptional peril, which saw the Americans looking expectantly northwards, while their equivalents were doing their best to look the other way. In other words, Britain was not at all concerned with what is British Columbia. And I did a presentation some years ago on the Alaska Panhandle, which is a similar kind of situation. But anyhow, he knew that we were under threat. And I put a little note at the bottom of the page here. The Fenian raids of 1864 were a threat to Canada. There were all these troops from the American Civil War who had nothing to do, so we could look northward. Isn't that interesting that 150 years later, we're in the same position, with somebody looking northward? So, yes, in 1873, he was booted out of office because of the Pacific scandal, which Jim will talk about. And then he came back for those 13 years. And in his time period, what is really important, the unification of Canada was only one of the unifications that were taking place around the world. Bismarck was unifying the German states. Cavour was unifying all of the various Italian states. Austria-Hungary became the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the Americans had, as Jim said, bought Alaska. So you had these conglomerations, these unifications taking place all over the world. So Canada was not the only one. He said in 1867, Canada was passing through an exceptional period, which at the same time that some leaders were looking expectantly northwards, their equivalents in Britain were doing their best to look the other way. But his great comment at that time, confederation was a synonym for a nation's will to survive. And I think that's very profound. And what was the next one? And when you look at that, is it any different than it is today? You know, it's basically the same thing. You know, the provinces all wanting something and complaining. And I love the way he's got it, you know, it's very good. And this, as he aged, and yes, he had a drinking problem. He was a raging alcoholic, and he had strokes. And by the end of his life, he had actually curtailed the drinking, but nonetheless, it was still there. And he had a lot of problems. And his name is on many, many buildings. And I will get to that when I do the wrap up of Sir John. But here is a school here in Calgary named after him. And there are those who don't like it.